We're breaking down another list today. This time it is the top Power 5 coaches according to CBS. And I got a couple issues with it, but we'll talk about those only here on Locked On Gators.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. Happy Friday. I'm Brandon Olson. You can find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Whole Nine Sports and GiantsCountryOfSI.com. Before getting into today's content, just ask you like, subscribe, comment, review. Let me know how I can make the show better for you. That rhymed, baby. But we're talking about this top Power 5 coaches list according to CBS, and it's vote. I can't even say like who it's by because it's by a lot of voters that ultimately they just averaged it out. And here's the thing: the list is kind of weird in a way where they were just told, "Hey, vote 1 through 65." There's no criteria for voting, so if your voting is based around this guy's the best recruiter, then that's what it is. It's this guy's the best coach, regardless of accolades, then that's what your votes are. If it's this guy has the best accolades, then that's what your vote is. So that's a little weird, but that's the way I view it is that it will all balance out to essentially be still just who the best coaches are. Billy Napier was on the list. Again, it was a list of all Power 5 coaches. Billy Napier was number 32 on the list. And I see people acting as if this is an absurd list in some way of Billy Napier's too high, Billy Napier's too low. I think this is kind of his wheelhouse right now. Could he be better? Obviously. But that will be something that we see next week or next year when the new list comes out. And people are talking about, oh, this is great. Like Dan Lanning of Oregon is very low on the list, even though he's probably going to be at least pretty decent. But he's a first-time head coach. He's never been a head coach anywhere before. He was Georgia's defense coordinator this year, so he's on the list. Obviously, he's low on the list because he's got no head coaching experience. Billy Napier is at 32 because he's been a head coach. He's been a dang good head coach at that, with multiple Sun Belt Conference championships under his belt. And I feel like that's something that people are kind of overlooking, where, yes, you can look at it and go, who cares? It's a group of 5. I care. You were the best at your conference. I don't care if you're in, I mean, I do care if you're in the SEC, but I don't care if you're in the SEC or the SBC with the Sun Belt. I don't care if you're D2. If you're the best at that job for multiple years in a row, that's a big accomplishment, okay? If you haven't gotten the recognition of getting to a Power 5 school, that ain't your fault. Simple as that. So I think that it's like, yeah, first time Power 5 coach. But he's been successful as a head coach where he was before this. He brought Louisiana to the top 25 2 years in a row. This past year, I believe he brought them to 15, and the year before the highest he brought them to was 16, which, I mean, that's impressive, because that's the AP going. He brought this team, this Sun Belt team. He made them a top 16 team in the country, and that's a big accomplishment to get. Like, Billy Napier is not some green, like, he's not Dan Lanning, who's never been a head coach before and is now a head coach. He's not Joe Moorhead, who's now the head coach at Akron, who will be in the Power 5 sooner rather than later, most likely. But Billy Napier did a consistently fantastic job of using limited resources that he had at Louisiana in terms of athletic facility, in terms of recruiting, in terms of building his coaching staff, and all these things. Where I mean, Louisiana yesterday got a an anonymous donation, or at least it's anonymous to us. We don't know who did it, but we know it's an alumni donation where it's like they got $125,000, and that's this massive deal because that's money that will make Louisiana significantly better. So it's things like that where there were not a ton of resources available at hand for Billy Napier at Louisiana, but guess what? He took that team and he made them a legitimate contender and won the Sun Belt with them. And then on top of that, he consistently developed his players where he got multiple players drafted into the NFL where Robert Hunt was I believe Robert Hunt when he came out of Louisiana was a day 2 pick, if I'm not mistaken. That was a day 2 pick to the Miami Dolphins. They had Percy Butler this year. It's with Washington. Max Mitchell got drafted to the New York Jets. He got guys consistently drafted and developed them consistently enough to get them into the NFL. There were also on this list uh, 2 coaches that were listed as most likely to win big later. And one of those coaches was Billy Napier. The other, Mario Cristobal, which I feel like that one's a little weird because I feel like the expectations of Mario Cristobal immediately were be at or near the top of the ACC. Where I feel like the expectations for Billy Napier right now are build the program a little bit, but in a few years, Billy Napier, of course, has to um, compete and contend against Bama, Georgia, and all of them. Whoever you like, Texas A&M is going to be fierce in a couple of years. Just the recruiting job they've done alone, they're going to be able to out athlete a lot of people. Auburn probably won't be. Sorry, Zach, love you, but I have no faith in your coaching staff. But there are a lot of teams in the SEC where they're trending up. You look at Arkansas, they're trending up, and there are a lot of these teams where Florida's got to play catch up essentially, and they're doing that with Billy Napier. He's done a great job recruiting so far. I don't care how you feel about it, genuinely. He's done a great job, and so yes, he's most likely to win big later. He has probably a pretty long leash right now, I'd say, just uh, given what he's shown so far and what we saw last year from Dan Mullen. I think Billy Napier, they're kind of going, you know what, take your time, build the program, become great again. And it's as simple as that. But we're about to talk about how Billy Napier could, or how his position on this list could change, whether it's improved or falling. But first, a quick word from BetOnline, because today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. And I mean, look, NBA playoffs are going to be wrapped up in a few weeks, unfortunately. Actually, fortunately, because it's just blowouts every time, so it's horrible. MLB, well underway. Tennis, the French Open's going, and it's a blast. By the way, if you haven't been watching, but betonline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information. I've been using BetOnline for 5 years now. Couldn't be happier with the experience. Love it so much. Not just baseball, basketball, football, soccer, tennis, darts, ping pong. It's got reality TV, award shows, politics, economics, everything. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn all about the trends and action. Check out BetOnline. It's where the game starts. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to podcasts. Now we are talking about how Billy Napier could, or what could change Billy Napier's position on this top power, or not even top Power 5 list, because it's all the Power 5, but Power 5 coaching list. I think that we should start by talking about rising, because I think that's the most likely thing that we'll see from next year. But it's also just, I think it's what will happen. But we'll talk about rising, where I think one thing that could really help Billy Napier is, let's say Florida this year hits their expectations, not exceeds them, but hits them. If the expectation is 6 wins, then they win six. If the expectation is seven, then they win seven. But let's say they do exactly that, and they win the games they're projected to win, and they lose the games they're projected to win. How could Billy Napier change his position? First off, if he if he seals the deal with some of these highly ranked, highly touted recruits that Florida's been talking to, and that Florida's been offering, and that Florida's been bringing in for visits, I think that will help him, because we look at what the expectations are. If he hits those expectations, and the people who are voting based on essentially those expectations, they shouldn't change their opinion much of him. People voting are on accolades, wasn't expected to get any, did his job, probably won't change that much. And the people that vote on, that heavily weigh, if you're a good recruiter, Billy Napier will climb in those. So staying stagnant in the other two and climbing in one will help him raise. I think the reasonable expectation from outside media looking in at the Florida Gators for this season, I think the expectation nationwide is a 6-6 record. So if Florida wins 7 games or wins 8 games, that should bump them up a little bit. But also, let's take an approach as to, let's say the Florida Gators go 6-6, like they hit the national media expectation for this football team in 2022, and recruiting wise, they're where they're expected to be. They get the guys they should get. They don't get the guys they shouldn't get. Whatever that means. And let's say Florida goes 6-6. There are a few games that I think, even if you go 6-6, if you win those games, then you can make a lasting impression enough where some voters will go, Billy Napier's the real deal. The roster this year wasn't amazing, but they exceeded expectations, or not exceeded expectations, but they won some games they shouldn't have won. They lost games that were toss-ups. Like if Florida beats Georgia or Texas A&M, or LSU, which I feel like Florida should beat LSU this year, but I also feel like it's like Tennessee or Kentucky, where even if we're like, oh, like this is a down year for Florida, it's like, well, they still beat Tennessee or Kentucky. And I feel like Florida's at that point kind of where it's like, well, Florida should beat LSU because it's a down year for LSU, but then LSU just seems to walk away with wins, whether it's 2020, where I don't care about the shoe, the rest of that game is just an absolute mess. And LSU walked away, even though Florida should have won that game handedly. Last year, LSU was not a good football team. Neither was Florida, but I thought they were better than LSU. But LSU walked away with a win there, handedly, kind of. So there's that. But let's say Florida beats Georgia, beats Texas A&M, beats LSU, loses to like South Carolina or Missouri, or a team that Florida's probably going to be expected to be close with, but then they beat the team that they're expected to get blown out with. I think the voters will give Florida that credit of, well, they outperformed their roster. They maximized talent there. Ways that Florida, or Billy Napier specifically, could fall on this list, I think the only real way is, let's say expectations are 6-6. If Florida goes 4-8, maybe 3-9, but again, like that's lower than the floor. I think the absolute floor is 4-8, and even then, I think that's about as likely as saying Florida's going to win 10 games, because I don't think that'll happen. But I think saying Florida will lose 4 games is as likely as saying Florida will win 10. So I think 4-8 will really hurt Billy Napier. Obviously, if Florida beats only South Florida, Eastern Washington, Vandy, and then one of Florida State, Missouri, South Carolina, and they just win 4 games total. I think that would hurt his ranking, of course, because again, if the expectation is 6-6 and you go 4-8 or even 5-7 at this point, then yeah, that's you're not reaching those expectations and it's going to hurt you. It also matters how I think Florida performs against schools like Georgia or Texas A&M, where if Florida loses those games by 30, we're going to be like, well, they're a laughing stock at that point. And so I think that's going to be um, I want to say a point of concern for some of the voters in this scenario or some of the national media folk. So I think it's that, but we're about to take a look at some I'll say questionable spots on this Power 5 list. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Now, to wrap up today's show, we are talking about some questionable spots on this list. And I got 2 people that I think are too low and 2 people that I think are too high. And by too low, I mean that they're in their, it's like, oh, like, well, they should be 25, but they're 43. Things like that. So I think first on the too low section has to be Greg Schiano, who used to be the head coach of the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, and a lot of listeners here probably better know him as the, I believe, 3-year head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after Rutgers. But let's just be completely honest and open about it, which is kind of how I prefer to approach things on this show. Rutgers has been horrible since Greg Schiano left the first. Like after his first stint with Rutgers, they have been terrible since then. But in 2021, so this past season, Rutgers made a bowl game in Greg Schiano's first year back. And yes, I get it. They made the bowl game because Texas A&M had COVID issues and a couple other teams had COVID issues, and so people had to get shuffled around and teams had to get shuffled around. But here's the thing. Rutgers wasn't just like, oh, you guys are free, let's go. Like, that wasn't how it was considered. It was Rutgers wasn't bowl eligible, but they were very close to being bowl eligible. And so Rutgers got the spot there, which it's very easy to say, well, if this is pretty much any other year without Greg Schiano, they probably aren't even close to being eligible to being that alternate spot. So Greg Schiano deserves a lot of credit for what he did with Rutgers. I think they're a team that will continue to kind of climb and work their way up on the list. People that are too high on the list, Tom Allen with Indiana. And I'm sorry, I love you, Jacob Rude, with Locked On Hoosiers, but look, 2020 was solid for the Hoosiers. And yes, 2021, the Hoosiers ran into an absolute gauntlet with 6 of their 12 games being against ranked opponents, and those 6 being Michigan, who made a playoff, Cincy, who made a playoff, Ohio State, who was close, Michigan State, who was close, Iowa, and Penn State. But those are just 6 losses that Indiana picked up. Indiana in 2021 went 2-10. That is absolutely atrocious. Especially when you consider going into the 2021 season, the Indiana Hoosiers were ranked. I think they were number 17 or 18 in the nation when week 1 rolled around. But then they got blown out by Rutgers, who Greg Schiano we just mentioned. They got blown out by Minnesota. They got blown out by Purdue. They got stopped. And their only 2 wins, because again, they went 2-10, were against Idaho and Western Kentucky, who Western Kentucky in their own respect did make a bowl game. Bailey Zappi is a monster. But look, Indiana they lost games they shouldn't have lost, and they got blown out in some games. They lost 34-6 to Iowa. Iowa's not a team that scores 34 points very often. Like that's bad to give up 34 to Iowa. They want to run the ball, kill the clock, and play defense. And they beat the brakes off you. 54-7 to Ohio State. I get it. Ohio State's great. But 54-7 and you're a Power 5 team? No. 38-3 to Rutgers. And look, we just talked about Rutgers was 5-7. He lost by 35 points to a 5-7 team? Unacceptable. And 44-7 to Purdue. Purdue, look, all respect to them, but 44-7 is bad. Like the amount of massive blowouts that Indiana took, it's absolutely pitiful, and that's why it's like, well, I have a hard time believing Tom Allen should be as high as he was on that list. Too low on the list, Mel Tucker from Michigan State, and I get this one might be more just me being me, but I think you can go make no mistake when you look at what Michigan State did last year compared to what their expectations were. They were phenomenal. No one thought that they were going to be as good as they were last year. No one thought Kenneth Walker III was going to be as good as he was last year, who, by the way, was primarily recruited to Michigan State by William Piegler, who is now with the Florida Gators. But what happened in East Lansing last year is nothing short of phenomenal. And then you look at this 2022 recruiting class compared to Michigan State's 2021 recruiting class, their 2020 recruiting class, their 2019 recruiting class. Mel Tucker did a phenomenal job of making Michigan State and East Lansing, Michigan, significantly more attractive to these good recruits, these high caliber recruits, whether you're looking at high school recruits, whether you're looking at transfers like Florida right now is battling over Peyton Kirkland with Michigan State, and they lost Chris Bogle to Michigan State. So Mel Tucker has done a phenomenal job of making Michigan State an attractive landing spot for high school and college football players. And you look at the too high section again, Herm Edwards with Arizona State. And I say this with the utmost respect for Herm Edwards as an NFL coach and as an analyst and as a person, sure. But Herm Edwards, and he wasn't high on this list, by the way, but Herm Edwards deserves. This is essentially based on like last year. That's how it goes. That's just like there are some people who fell 20 spots and went up 20 spots. So this is a little bit of recency bias here. Herm Edwards, based on the past year of Arizona State football, Herm Edwards should be dead last on the list right now. Like for the mess that is that Arizona Sun Devils program, Herm Edwards should be dead last on the list. I don't care about who has experience, I don't care about Pry with Virginia Tech. I don't care about any of that. I care about Herm Edwards has completely dismantled that Arizona State program. He's made a complete mockery of that Arizona State program, and they weren't much to begin with, but he made a mockery of them. And he did nothing but absolutely nuke that program. So Herm Edwards deserves to be absolutely last on that list, dead last on that list. There is no argument for that. I don't care about it. He demolished that program as quickly as he possibly could have. So Herm Edwards, too high on the list. Even if he was 65, that's too high on the list. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and for your regular listen to the podcast. We'll be back Monday with more on your Florida Gators. Now make your second listen Locked On SEC, hosted by Chris Gordy of Sports 790 Locked On SEC. Get the best coverage on the best conference in college sports, not just football, in college sports daily with Chris Gordy on Locked On SEC. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olson. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find my written work with Whole Nine Sports and GiantsCountryWestside.com. And I'll see you all Monday.